AI remains a hot topic online, in the news, and in the church. Communications recently hosted a webinar on AI, and hundreds of people like you signed up. We've seen an explosion of AI tools, from standalone or customized apps like PulpitAI, which we discussed earlier this year, to AI integrations in apps you're likely already using. The next generation of phones, tablets, and computers are being developed with AI built right in. So, as AI becomes even more integrated into our daily lives, we wanted to continue the conversation here on the podcast. And joining us today to help with that is Reverend James Lee, the Director of Communications for the Eastern Pennsylvania and Greater New Jersey Conferences of the United Methodist Church. Thank you to everybody for listening. My name is Dan Wunderlich. I'm a United Methodist pastor. And James, thank you so much for being here today.
Dan, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, let's begin by having you tell us a little bit about yourself and your ministry context. How did you come to be the communications director for not one, but two different annual conferences? And what does that job entail?
Yeah. So I am a Korean American. I've been in local church ministry and different ministry contexts for about 12 years now. I started out as a youth pastor of a large Korean church, then went to a multicultural setting. And then I was the video producer for the Greater New Jersey Conference for a couple years. Went back to the local church. And in the fall of 2022, our Bishop John Scholl, gave me a call and said, hey, so I'm overseeing two conferences now. We see this across the United Methodist Church, where we have fewer bishops. We still have ministry to do, same number of annual conferences. And our bishop was now overseeing two conferences. He said, we want to figure out how to affiliate, how to collaborate between two conferences. We want to first try out with the communications team. Can we have one communications team serving two conferences? And I think you're the dude to figure out how that works. And so I was in local church ministry, made it through the pandemic, was like very excited to get out of the pandemic. But this was also a very exciting opportunity. And so I did say yes to the call. And I've been in this role for almost 2 years now. I will say we very successfully figured out how to collaborate. And now we have 2 staff persons from the Eastern Pennsylvania Conference, 3 from the Greater New Jersey Conference, including myself. We're a team of 6 that 100% we serve both conferences equally in messaging. So there's a lot of collaboration, a lot of coordination. We ensure that our message is clear across both conferences. It's all about bridging gaps and making sure everyone feels connected and informed.
Oh, wow. Well, and I will note, of course, that we are approaching, if not in the middle of annual conference season. So thank you for taking the time to be here, as I'm sure you have your hands full. I'm getting ready to head to ours next week in the Florida annual conference. I'm in charge of worship, and so I'll be editing videos the whole rest of today. But I'm curious, we've had some communications directors on the show before. Some of them are clergy, some of them are not. Like, did you have a background or any education in communications, or was it just a passion? Were you one of those people that you learned video production, which made everyone think of you as the guy to go to for this kind of thing?
That's exactly it, Dan. I studied biology in college. I went to seminary, and in the midst of it all, I self-taught in video production. And for a couple of years, I ran my own wedding film company full time. And also my time working in the conference as the video producer in the communications team helped me really think about marketing and communications in a larger scale. And so it was very much self-taught. Since I began this role, I did take some courses from Cornell University on PR strategy and the like, but otherwise very much self-taught.
That's great. That's so encouraging, because so many of the people in our audience base are lay people or even staff people at church, or very frequently solo pastors who are having to do this work on top of everything else. And it's just good to know that this is a common path. And so if there are folks out there in our audience base who feel like they're learning it as they go, making it up as they go, don't feel less than, don't feel like, oh my gosh, everything would be so much better if I had an advanced degree in this stuff. Obviously that can help, and you can find resources like this podcast and more formal resources. But so many people in the world, especially of church communications, are self-taught. So that's really cool and encouraging. But James, we've discussed AI actually a few times in the last year, but we've mostly jumped right to the practical stuff, focusing on what we can do with it. But I know one of your areas of interest is in helping people understand AI. And this includes both the history and development of AI, and then how things like generative AI and large language models actually work. So can you give us a crash course in the history? For a lot of us, ChatGPT debuting in November of 2022, it was certainly a turning point, but that wasn't the beginning, right? It's been a part of our life probably much longer than we realize.
Yeah, absolutely, Dan. So while ChatGPT brought AI into like the mainstream consciousness, if you will, AI has been around for decades. It's think of recommendation systems on Netflix or voice assistants like Siri, even like autocorrect or tools like Grammarly. So AI has been integrated into many aspects of our daily lives for years. Now, what makes large language models like ChatGPT different is that most of the other AI tools I mentioned use what's called rule-based AI or symbolic
Mm.
AI. So
Mm-hmm.
think of like if A, then B, right? So you
Yeah.
put in all of these different rules to make the tool be helpful to people. While ChatGPT and other large language models is AI based on deep learning. So it's a machine learning or a deep learning AI. Now, machine learning really came into prominence in the 80s with the emerging developmental psychology studies in the
Mm.
70s and 80s, which determined that, if you look at a child, you don't have to teach it all the rules before the child understands the world. Isn't that true?
Mm.
So think
Yeah.
of language. When you teach a child language, you don't teach them all the grammatical rules before they begin to speak. No, what do children do? They hear people speak and they imitate and they try and they keep trying and keep trying and keep trying. They keep hearing different words, different sentences, and they essentially are developing their own rules in their minds,
Mm.
right? So the way that you, Dan, and I see the world is different. We've subconsciously over the many years we've lived on this earth built our own rules on how we see the world and understand the world and how we speak even. And so machine learning is imitating how a child sees and learns and experiences and interacts with the world. So rather than giving the machine all of the rules ahead of time and try to make that it work that way, instead, machine learning is giving the machine a vast corpus of data and
Mm-hmm.
having the machine develop its own rules. So we don't fully understand how these work because it's developing its own rules.
Right.
Right. But so now this didn't really work for about 30 years or so. But then in 2010, there was a huge breakthrough, not because we changed the algorithm per se, but because now with the internet, we have a huge amount of data that we can interpret and work with. So in the 80s and 90s, they had maybe 100 photos of cats and dogs, for instance, in a
Yeah.
study where they're trying to distinguish a cat from a dog. It wasn't able to work, but then in 2010, the machine was able to distinguish between a cat and a dog because now it was learning from not 100, but 100,000 and a million different
Yeah.
photos of cats and dogs. So when you increase the number of data, now the machine was able to perceive the world. And so that is how AI works. It's essentially imitating how a child learns and experiences the world. That's why it sounds the most human a machine ever has so far.
That's really helpful because I've got an Amazon Echo Dot in my kitchen and I've got an iPhone, so it has Siri built in, and you can ask them questions and there are certain questions that they can answer, but especially speaking of children, I have a kindergartner and she likes to have conversations with Alexa, but about half the things she asks, the response is I don't know that, or I don't know what you're asking, or I can't do that. And it just really drives home, like, it has a voice, but it's not thinking, right? It's answering the narrow set of tasks it has been designed to do. But you go on ChatGPT and you can have a full conversation. And there's not really, it might tell you I don't have information, but it doesn't say like I don't know what you're asking, or it's going to make an attempt. And it is so different. I think in that big jump, that's crazy. That was really helpful, and I feel like we've certainly reached the point now where if you aren't paying close attention, or you don't know what details to look for or to listen for, it is much easier to be fooled, quote unquote, by generated images or video or audio. I do some graphic design myself, so I pop on Pinterest a lot. And just in the last like 3 months, it just feels like Pinterest has been just awash in AI generated images. And if you know what to look for, like it's a little bit hazy, or, reflections might not be right. Or certainly if there's a person, look at the hands and it might mess up fingers. But like if you're going quickly, it just looks like a photograph, and no doubt 100% of our audience has read something online, that is largely, if not completely, AI generated, and we didn't realize it. At the same time, there's tons of marketing and fundraising messaging, that make it sound like magic or tease these huge strides in development that maybe aren't quite as close as they sound. There's been all these rumblings for the last year that OpenAI is really close to the general intelligence, or and all these safety people are quitting, and all the people on the outside are like, oh, they're about to do something crazy, and then they just released their newest version, and it's a step up from the last thing, but it wasn't a huge jump. So can you maybe ground us in the realistic limitations of AI, at least in this moment, understanding that things can change quite quickly?
Yeah, so certainly generative AI tools are very impressive, but they also have significant limitations. First, I would say it lacks true understanding. So AI, it generates responses based on patterns. ChatGPT, even in the name, you could see what it actually is and how it works. So GPT stands for Generative Pre-trained Transformer. Now the T, transformer, this is a statistical model developed by Google a year prior to OpenAI's launch in 2018. So in 2017, Google developed the transformer, and essentially it's a statistical model that is able to determine what the next likely word is that fits your prompt. So it doesn't really comprehend context the way a human does. It doesn't truly understand, if you will, what it's saying. It is finding words that are statistically most likely. So whenever I speak a sentence like, hey, I like to drink coffee, like I like to drink coffee, with every word, it has a statistical relationship with each other. And so that's what it is essentially. Also, AI, one of its limitations is also to perpetuate biases that may be present in its training data. So this could lead to inaccurate outputs. We also see hallucinations, which happens all the time. It's getting much better, but it's still prevalent just because of the way it's built. And thirdly, while AI can produce high quality content, it's always going to be based on its learned data. So it's always going to be a perpetuation of what already exists. So you're going to get things that people maybe statistically have proven to like in the past, but you're not going to get that super out of the box, very creative, very original content, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
It's going to be a perpetuation of what it already is out there.
Yeah, I have so many thoughts. So my wife is a college professor, and I know that there have been cases where ChatGPT in particular, we'll just keep picking on them because they're the most public. Like, they invent academic papers that don't exist. But what they're doing is they're predicting what's the next word. And so, like, they sometimes even would put together two authors who have published a ton but never published together. But it makes sense that, like, this professor would likely publish, this professor publishes a lot, so it's a study by this person and this person, and then they generate a title, but it's a paper that doesn't exist. It just happens to be the most likely thing that would exist if you were rolling the dice on all of the words in there. So that's an issue. But then also, like I said, we talked about PulpitAI, and there's now multiple versions of services like that. And what that does is you put your sermon into it, and basically it uses your sermon as the source text, and then it ties into ChatGPT. But it's not helping you generate your content, but it's helping you reformat it and helping you find connections that maybe you didn't even see. And at least for me, and we're still obviously on the very, very earliest front edge of all of this stuff. That seems like the safest thing. But we'll get into the ethical issues here in a second. But it sounds too like if it were to be the case sometime that it was ruled that these companies have to delete all the source material they didn't get permission to input, I mean, that could kneecap the whole industry. Does that seem right?
Sure. Yeah.
Well, Okay, so let's get into those ethical issues, because I know
Yeah, let's
probably
dive right in. Yeah.
yeah, let's dive right into that. I would imagine if there's anything holding back our audience from jumping into AI or using it, it's one of two things. Number one, either we don't know enough about it, we don't feel comfortable enough jumping in, or we just haven't had the time to play with it. And then the second thing is probably a sense of there are moral and ethical issues here. Perhaps the most visible, and we've touched on this, is how these companies train their models. They have basically sucked up as much content as possible, and more apps that I use and services that I subscribe to, I'm now getting pop-ups saying like, hey, you need to opt in or out of us like dumping your data into training our AI, right? This stuff is fed into the machines, and a lot of this stuff has been done sometimes without notice and certainly without compensation. I'm friends with a voice actor, and she was offered $40,000 to do a single recording session to be fed into AI. And, here she would actually be compensated, right? This is not them stealing her work, but she still turned it down because there are some fields and some industries in particular where there's this fear that AI is going to replace a whole industry or a whole group of people. Then of course there's questions of plagiarism and citation. So how do we as Christians who want to both keep up with the times and the tools, but also live out an ethic of love for other human beings, what are some lenses or some questions that we can use to guide our thinking?
Dan, this is such a good question, and it's a loaded question,
Yeah,
has
for sure.
multiple parts to it. I'd like to begin by saying this is the greatest communication shift in our generation. So
Mm,
think of the printing press, think of the internet. Google CEO Sundar Pichai said this is more groundbreaking than fire or electricity.
mm,
And with any kind of major innovation of this kind, you will see major shifts in culture. So this spring break, my family and I have three little children. We went to DC for spring break and we visited the Bible Museum. And I
yeah,
loved seeing all of the Bibles that were handwritten by scribes pre-printing press, and then seeing the Bibles that were produced through the printing press. It was this
yeah,
before and after, and how ornate and how beautiful the handwritten Bibles were. It was all the illustrations. But historians would all agree that the printing press was a huge added net positive to human society. The way in which information was able to be mass produced and shared across not just hundreds, but now hundreds of thousands, maybe even millions of people. Uh, but those scribes would probably disagree because a lot of them lost their jobs.
yeah,
So we are we are in the midst of that culture shift right now. There's a lot of uncertainty of what our creative jobs will look like. Now, going back to your question, your kind of understanding of AI and its limitations, we must be mindful that AI tools, they still need and require human oversight
yeah,
for accuracy, for appropriateness, and so these tools enhance us rather than replace us. But some of our creative jobs may change in how it's done, right? A lot of those jobs are going to shift, right? So a
yeah,
scribe may have to learn how to put typeface together, right? So we're definitely going to see those kind of shifts. Regarding the um, question of plagiarism and copyright infringement, this conversation is extremely nuanced
yeah,
because, again, the way that generative AI works, it's not copy pasting or lifting from one work and putting it into another. It's imitating how humans create original content. And I'm sort of using air quotes as I say
right, yeah, yeah,
original right now, because like when I write a sermon, Dan, or when I create a video, or when I paint a painting, am I not ultimately pulling from inspiration from other sermons I've heard, other videos I've watched, other paintings I've looked at over the course of my life? Right? Somehow those things are in some way inspiring me and informing my work. And so
absolutely,
generative AI works the same way. It's not copy paste. It's learning and then generating original content. It has listened to, watched, and looked at more sermons and videos and paintings that I ever did.
right.
Right? It does it much faster than I do, and that is why it is a threatening gesture to many creatives today. But I think it has to be very clear. Like, we don't know where the line is because we never had to draw a line like this before. And
Yeah,
so, yeah,
yeah,
the current,
definitely.
yeah, yeah. So the current state of AI, it's like the Wild West. It's that line is going to move across our lifetimes. I also believe that now is a time for Christians and thought leaders to engage in informed dialogue about the ethical considerations of AI and how to live well in an AI world, right? So, how are we prioritizing transparency or consent and fairness? What does
Mm,
that look like? How are we supporting human dignity? How are we promoting justice and fostering community? How are we making sure we're doing no harm and doing good and making sure that humanity stays in love with God? All these things, I think, I want to inject in the conversation of ethics in this time when so many things are unclear. I hope that Christians aren't just demonizing it and stepping away from it and not even engaging in the conversation, but actually using
yeah.
the tools, learning its benefits and its limitations, and in engaging in those thoughtful, informed conversations.
And I think that's the key too. And I mean, there's no better example of the perhaps the world in general, but also the church too, not taking that seriously than the development of social media over the last 20
Yes,
years.
yes,
You know,
exactly. Yes.
you look, and obviously we are so far behind in regulating the social media industry, whether that's through actual legal regulations, or just how we think about it. There's been so much, and some of it is that I'm a parent of a young child, but there's been so many conversations, so many books, articles, podcasts, new organizations started in the last, just I feel like 6 months to a year, about keeping kids off of social media until an appropriate age, because we just kind of like thought, oh, this is a great way to keep up with friends. And then we discover 10 years down the road that this had, detrimental effects on mental health and social development and all of these things. And so maybe we can learn from our failings with social media to look at AI and say it is neither the right road to ignore it, but it's also not right to just jump in with no plan, I guess. And maybe this is one area that the church can lead, is that we can do some of the deep thinking and we can be the moral and ethical voice. And I know there's lots of people doing this kind of work. We've previous guests on this show, Brady Shear from Pro Church Tools, has developed kind of his own framework for rules for churches using AI. Kenny
Mm.
Jang has been on our podcast before. He's talked about those kinds of things. Jason Moore, he hasn't been on the show, but he resources with a lot of conferences. He's working on a new book on AI in the church. So, like, James, do you have or do you recommend churches develop an AI policy, or do you guys have one for your own office, or is it kind of still something you're kind of figuring out, building the bridge as you walk across it?
Yeah, I absolutely recommend churches develop AI policies, and our office, we're in the process of making one now. I Regarding the social media piece, Dan, I couldn't have said it better.
Mm,
What With what's going on with the world and the church and AI now, it reminds me of 2010
yeah,
when the church was very silent regarding social media, and
yeah.
now we're trying to catch up a little bit. And I was a little disappointed. I wish the church was a part of those conversations early on. How are we doing this well? Right now with AI, all these companies are developing it so fast, right? What's next? How can we do better?
Right.
How can we do better? How can we do better without really asking the question, should we?
Mm,
Uh,
mhm.
and I think informed conversations are absolutely necessary.
I totally got the Jurassic Park illusion there. That was good.
Yeah, yes, 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 exactly. So yeah, the I think the beauty of having an AI policy is it helps you. It gives permission to use it well and to
Yeah.
say that yes, we have thought through and will continue to think through the great benefits and the limitations of this tool and how to use it well in a world where not everyone is fully on board just yet. So how are we being transparent about how we're using this tool? I think that's the beauty of having a policy. So we're in the works right now in our organization.
Well, and I'm so grateful for what you've shared with us so far, because I'm coming to realize now as this conversation is going on, it's really your AI policy. It sounds like a bunch of rules, but it is based off of your understanding of how AI works, right? Like if it's this
Yes.
magic box that can just produce everything, then you might have to set some limits around what let's just check and make sure that like everything, the quote is real, or this person actually said it or something like that. But if we actually understand how it works, and what it's doing, then we can create the boundaries that make it a useful tool and not make it a hammer that we're just hitting everything with. So all right, well, we have spent an awesome amount of time, a really solid laying this foundation. But this is, of course, the marketing podcast, and so let's start to look at this practically. Obviously, your role as director of communications for a conference is both similar and different to what we are doing as church communicators in a local church. The principles and techniques are the same, even if the execution and scale might look a little bit different. But especially in today's world, where it's as much about making digital content and creation, resource creation and storytelling, much more than placing ads. How are you incorporating AI into the creative side of your work?
Oh, yes. I use generative AI tools pretty much daily at this point in my workflow. So we use AI to streamline administrative tasks. We use it to analyze engagement metrics. We've been playing around with that for sure. We've used it to better tailor our content to meet the needs of our audience, to review our content. And when it comes to content creation, AI is almost like having another member on your team
Yeah.
who brainstorms with you, who can assist in generating initial drafts. I will say, ever since I use generative AI tools in my workflow, I have not experienced writer's block. So, in the past, as someone who's a creative, as someone who's doing a lot of writing, if I hit writer's block, I get stuck and I have to, you know, take a day to kind of ruminate and try to get back on my feet or try getting new ideas. But whenever I hit any kind of wall, I would simply ask my AI assistant, what am I not thinking about here? Or give me
Yeah.
some ideas in XYZ, and it'll get me right going. It just injects that creative spark again. So
Mm.
I forgot what writer's block is like, that dread of writer's block,
Right.
ever
The
since I've
blank
used this
page.
tool.
Yeah.
Yeah. You don't have the blank page syndrome is over. Yep.
Absolutely. We have been brainstorming some ideas for some podcasts we could do at my local church that aren't sermons. And it has been an excellent brainstorming partner, because you just ask it for some ideas and it gives you 20, and then you pick like the 2 or 3 that you like and say, give me some more ideas like this, or give me an example script of what this podcast might look like. And
Mm.
there are people who have automated whole scripts to where they're like writing podcasts and getting an artificial voice to record it, quote unquote, and then it gets posted and they don't do anything, right? They just get the ad revenue. But again, to go back to that ethical side of things, it really is, it is a huge jump starter. But I also noticed something in there. Like, so many of us think of AI as like purely creative. Like, let me plug in so I can get a header image for this announcement, or get a video bumper for the sermon, or this will help me brainstorm a topic for a sermon series or a blog idea. But I heard in there, and correct me if I'm wrong, that you are also using this to analyze data. And
Mm.
this is maybe a side of AI that some of us who are more creative minded and less math minded or less analytical minded, we might forget about, or we might not realize that this is actually a tool for. So was I hearing that right? And if so, how are you using AI, and or are there AI tools outside of just like the free version of Chat GPT that have been really helpful in areas like that?
Yeah. And I will say, especially the earlier models of ChatGPT and
Mm-hmm.
other large language models, we're not really good at numbers and math. So I use it with some skepticism, but I just love that its ability to quote unquote analyze large amounts of data. And so recently we've done things like we've put out a massive survey to our annual conferences about what the annual conference session was like. We do that every
Mm-hmm.
year. And then to be able to put that through an AI model and to give us bullet points and summaries and some trends, so to speak, some big picture trends that we can then look at as the extended cabinet. So that was one way I've used it recently. So it is really good at looking at large amounts of data. It's really good at analyzing spreadsheets. So it's getting better and better. And so
Mm.
those are some ways that we are using it.
Yeah, this is off a tangent from marketing, but Reverend Chad Brooks, who is from the Louisiana conference, he was on our Pulpit AI episode. He has been feeding in. He now works with a lot of churches. He's now feeding in church attendance records. And they're actually able to, you always think of like a holiday weekend is going to be low, but like AI can actually help you figure out the rhythms of your community. Like, each specific community might have a specific weekend or a month that is lower than normal, and it's not the same, or it's not caused by, a national holiday. And it's been really interesting to see insights like that. But let's get even more practical. We all have priorities. We got to-do lists. We all have limited amounts of time, especially, again, for those of us who this is an added responsibility on top of being the pastor or the youth pastor, or maybe we're a volunteer. What are some ways that AI has helped you? And maybe that you've talked about brainstorming and not starting with a blank page, but what are some ways you've used AI to help with organization and productivity?
Yeah. So, I mean, maybe I'll dive a little bit deeper into the
Sure.
brainstorming aspect. So, yeah, whenever I'm jumping into a new project, I do daydreaming, I'm exploring diverse ideas. The first thing I would do is I would go on either ChatGPT, which has Dolly built into it, or Ideagram. I really like Ideagram.ai,
Okay.
or even Midjourney, some of these image generation, and just help me visualize the ideas that are swirling in my head. So we were creating a new sermon series. And so I just put it into Ideagram. Now, I wasn't going to use these graphics ultimately, but just to start throwing different ideas of what the visuals of this new sermon series would look like. I would even say, what would it look like on a coffee mug, right? Like
Yeah.
it just to start creating some sparks and some ideas. And so I used especially the image generation tools just to get inspired. I also, ChatGPT is really good at teaching me things. So in the past, if you wanted to learn something, you would have to find a tutor or look up books or get an encyclopedia. For millennials and Gen Zs, it's all about those YouTube videos. Find the right YouTube videos to teach you how to do XYZ.
Yeah.
Now ChatGPT is your tutor. So I'm bilingual in Korean and English. My Korean is a good like middle school level Korean. And I always wanted to improve my Korean and higher level Korean. And ChatGPT is my Korean tutor.
Mm.
So I set up a chat line that is essentially a higher education, higher level Korean tutor that quizzes me on different vocabulary. So I'm improving my Korean. Like it's teaching me Korean. It's
Oh,
actually
wow.
really good at translating different languages. Um, so you could learn something new in record time. If there was something you wanted to learn, like a new language you wanted to learn, I challenge you to try it on ChatGPT and see what happens. I also think about like tech support. So you could take a picture of a device or a tool or a machine and say, what is this and how do you work it? And it will take you step by step on how to work different machines.
Wow.
You could
Yeah.
take a picture of the inside of your refrigerator and say, hey, give me some meal ideas from the food that are here. And it will give you recipes using looking at the things that are in your refrigerator. So that that was things that used to be exclusive to ChatGPT 4.
Mm.
On May 16th, ChatGPT 4 Omni, ChatGPT 4.0 is now free to the public. And
Oh,
so
wow.
now a lot of these tools are free for people. Uh,
That's awesome.
so there's the possibilities are endless. The things that you can do. It's pretty remarkable.
Well, and correct me if I'm wrong, they can also generate code as well. So like if you've got a church website and maybe you are, hopefully you've got some sort of web builder using Squarespace or Divi or something that makes it a little bit easier. But if you've got something semi-unique, or you're having an issue with a specific part of your website that isn't showing up right, it can either analyze code, or it can actually generate code for you, including JavaScript, to add some functionality. Is that right too?
That is true. Actually, even from the beginning, ChatGPT was trained in Python.
Mm,
And so when it comes to coding, it's really, really good. It's scary how good it is. So even HTML, it's just very good at HTML language. And so I've built some very basic programs. I'm still in the experimental phase, but
yeah.
programs that would create content for me that is specific to what I need. So yeah, if you're trying to create a different programs, if you want to learn coding, ChatGPT is a great tool for that.
That's cool. My wife, like I said, she's a college professor, and she had an idea of trying to come up with basically just like a random generator. So like set up a web page, load in like 100 encouraging messages, and so that when her students are really stressed out, they can go to the website and it loads like a random one. Well, like you could do totally something similar as like a discipleship tool on a website, and that might not be a feature that's built into your basic web builder, but it can help you do stuff like that. So it really seems like the possibilities are endless. You just got to be creative, and it used to be like my daughter's kindergarten. They are learning coding, but it seems more and more as tools like this are able to generate code. The skill needed in the future is going to be prompt writing and thinking about creative ways to have the tools do the grunt work, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. I equate it to. I think the advent of the calculator is a pretty
Mm,
good
yeah.
analogy. It's not a perfect analogy, but it's a very good analogy. I remember in the sixth grade, I was very good at math, Dan, and I would lord it over my less mathematically inclined
Yeah.
peers. Like you can't do that in your head, right? I know 25 times 4 is 100, like
Yeah.
whatever it is. And a friend of mine would raise his hand and say, "Mr. So and so, when do we need to know this in the real world? We'll have a
Yeah.
calculator." That question is being asked in English classes today.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
when will we
Absolutely.
need to know how to write essays? Because this can do it for us. And so there's some problem there. I think students still today, even though the calculator has been out for many, many decades, still learn basic arithmetic. And so knowing it and still learning it, I think would be important. But with the advent of the calculator, we were able to democratize access to knowledge. So
Mm-hmm.
it's not just people like me have access to math, like all people do. And the second thing is it allowed more of one's brain power to go towards the big picture and visioning and nuance and creativity. So if you're spending less time calculating the final cost of an item of this t-shirt I'm trying to buy right after the 20% sale or whatever, means I could spend more of my brain power asking the bigger questions like will this shirt go with the rest of my wardrobe, or
Nice. Yeah.
can I afford this, right? And
Yeah.
so the same thing is happening with creative work like language and even video production or image generation. It's, do you have a really good idea? It
Yeah.
ultimately democratizes access to skills and knowledge. So uh, a friend of mine came to me and said, "James, look at this video I made with AI. This person has no video production
Mm.
experience whatsoever, and the video was pretty good." And the first feeling I felt was threatened. Right? I
Yeah,
spent
of
many,
course.
many years honing my skill as a video producer, and yet I thought, we as a culture, we tend to equate technical skills with creativity.
Yeah.
Like if you are a painter, you're a creative. If you are a pianist, you are creative. But to be a pianist, you have to train in a very specific technical skill. To be a video producer, you need to learn how to work a camera, what f-stops are and ISOs and all those things.
Yeah.
But there's a big idea on one side, there's this big gap called technical skill, and there is the final product that is an added good to the world on the far other side. And what AI is doing is it's narrowing this gap. So if you have a really good idea, there's a lot less holding you back from producing something that will be an added benefit to the world.
That's so great. Well, and let's go there. Let's have this optimistic view of the future. And one of the things that I hope is that these tools actually do free us up for creative thinking and making strides in developments rather than just raising the workload. It's very possible that because things churn faster, we have this really bad habit in society of just then raising the amount of videos you've got to produce, rather than taking that free time to be creative and flourishing in things. But obviously, we can't know exactly where anything is headed. 1 month from now, there could be a development no one saw coming. But we know that many of these tools, they're going to get better. They're going to be more accessible. They're going to become more affordable. People that have the vision for that video in their head but can't afford a camera, can't afford a souped up MacBook Pro and all of the programs, they're going to be able to get these ideas out of their head. What are your hopes and maybe specifically for enhancing and even enabling ministry?
Yeah. My greatest hope when I first dove into using generative AI was a better supported pastor and a better supported church staff.
Yeah.
ChatGPT 3.5 came out the same month that I started my current job. And I said, oh, I wish I had this when I was in ministry at a local church, because I can't tell you how often, how lonely I felt when in ministry, because as a pastor, as I was in a context of about 100, 150 in worship, and I was the only full-time staff. We had some part-time staff that were helping out with the different works in the ministry, but I was the only full-time staff person. And as the pastor and as a sole pastor, I'm expected to do 20 different things. I'm gifted in maybe 2 of them. Right? So where am I spending most of my time? I'm spending most of my time on the 18 things I'm not good at, because that's what I need to be better at in order to actually fulfill the needs of the ministry of my local church context. And so I see this tool and I go, wow, I think of the hours I spent trying to figure out how to write the best stewardship campaign letter.
Yep.
Of course, we have to think of how are we using this ethically? How are we transparent about it when we use it? But I see a better supported pastor. I see a pastor and church staff persons who are able to use more of their brain power towards the big picture, to the nuance, to experimentation, and less on the daily grind. They're spending less time, right, calculating that that equation, because they have a quote unquote calculator, and now they're able to spend more of their time in other bigger places, and maybe even more time with family, more time with people that matters, more time having necessary Sabbath rest, things like that. So I have great hope for an enhanced, better supported pastor and church staff.
Oh, that's beautiful. May it be so.
Amen.
Well, James, we like to ask all of our guests to offer words of encouragement to our listeners. It can be on the topic we talked about, or it can really be anything. These folks are doing the day in, day out work of church marketing and communications. Sometimes they get recognized positively. Sometimes they're only recognized when there's a typo. But how might you encourage the folks like that?
That's good. I just want to say you're not alone. And I hope that you would explore using AI tools, that this would be like another member on your team. Like you have an intern, a helper, someone to assist you, someone to walk alongside you, as much as it is a digital tool, just to remind you that you're not alone, and that this is good work that we're doing. And yeah, you have a community, you have people around you.
Well, thank you so much for your time and wisdom today, James. We really appreciate it, again, especially during this busy conference season. If anybody wants to connect with you, they want to say hi, they want to ask questions, or just follow your work, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, you could. I always love to engage in conversations about AI and other ministry related things. I can't promise you I have the answers, but I love to talk. So you could reach me on my email. My email is jlee, JLEE, at gnjumc.org. And that would be the best way to reach me. I'd love to continue conversations.
Well, thank you so much for being on the show today, James. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Dan. Take care.
And before we hit the outro, I would just like to take a moment to say thank you to all of you. This is not the final episode of the MyCom Church Marketing Podcast, but it is my last episode as your host. The world of church marketing and communications and the world in general has changed so much since my first episode way back in February of 2018. And across 77 episodes, we have walked together, figuring out how best to use our unique skills to share the gospel and connect our churches with our communities. And it has been both a privilege and a pleasure. And if I can leave you with my own words of encouragement, it's simply to remind you of that alternate definition of marketing I picked up from Seth Godin years ago and have already shared with you a million times. Good, effective marketing is telling your story in such a way that if people knew the truth about you, they'd want to work with you. So please keep telling the story of the gospel, the story of your church, and the story of your people. Tell the truth and use your effort, your creativity, and the tools at your disposal to tell it in a way that connects with and inspires your community. And if you know how to do that well, you can weather every algorithm change, every new platform, and every new trend. You got this. All right, listeners, we do still want to hear from you as the show continues. How have you incorporated AI into your ministry or workflow? And if you haven't yet, what's one area you'd love for AI to support and enhance? Email the team at podcast@umcom.org, and we just might share your thoughts or stories on a future episode. And you can, of course, use that email, podcast@umcom.org, to send us any feedback or topic suggestions for the show. We always love hearing from you. And as always, the easiest way to support the show and help other church communicators like yourself find it is by sharing this episode with your friends and colleagues and by leaving a review on whatever service you're listening to right now. And did you know that United Methodist Communications has celebrated over 80 years of ministry? Your support ensures that the latest denominational news, dynamic stories, and informative articles will continue to connect our global community. Make a tax-deductible donation today at resourceumc.org/giveumcom. Thanks again for listening to the MyCom Church Marketing Podcast.